The first strike of the sacred war drum rolled across the royal courtyard like thunder trapped inside stone. Ivy Mercer stopped breathing. Around her, 500 soldiers stood in formation beneath the black and silver banners of Thornhold, armor catching the pale morning sun, spears upright, war wolves restless at their handlers' sides. On the raised platform at the center of the courtyard, Alpha King Garrick Thorne stood before his army, in a dark military coat reinforced with steel at the shoulders, one hand resting on his sword. Behind him waited the massive drum that had opened every royal campaign for more than 200 years. The drummer lifted the mallet again. Boom! The second beat struck deeper. Ivy's fingers tightened around the strap of the signal satchel at her hip. No, she knew that. Spacing. She had spent 8 years studying forbidden cadence sheets by candlelight, comparing erased notations and damaged ledgers, tracing the sequence that had ended with her father, branded a traitor, and hundreds of soldiers dead in a valley. No one in court liked to name. The drummer drew back for the third strike. Stop. Her voice vanished beneath the courtyard noise. A signal servant beside her glanced over. What? Ivy stepped forward. Stop the drum. This time the nearest guards heard her. So did the drummer. His mallet hesitated. King Garrick turned his head. Even from the rear ranks, Ivy felt the weight of his attention. Garrick Thorne was not a man people interrupted. His authority did not come from shouting. It came from the certainty that when he gave an order, everyone around him moved. The drummer looked to the king. Garrick gave one small nod. Continue. Ivy's stomach dropped. The mallet rose. She saw the final cadence before she heard it. 2 slow strikes. 1 shortened pause. Then 3 fast beats. Her father's sequence. A code that was not supposed to exist anymore. No. Iviram. A guard caught her by the arm before she reached the platform. Stand down. You don't understand. I said stand down. The mallet began to fall. Ivy twisted hard, slipped from the guard's grip, and hit the stone steps at a run. Someone shouted behind her. Boots moved. Steel scraped free of a sheath. Too late. She reached the drum as the drummer prepared the third beat. Ivy pulled the utility knife from her belt and drove the blade across the stretched hide. The sacred war drum split open, with a sound like cloth tearing in a silent room. The mallet struck nothing. The entire courtyard froze. For one impossible second, no soldier moved. No wolf barked. Ivy stood with the knife still in her hand, staring at the long cut she had made through 2 centuries of royal tradition. Then King Garrick stepped down from the platform. No one tried to stop him. He approached slowly, boots striking stone with measured force. Up close, he looked even more dangerous. Broad-shouldered, dark-haired, his expression controlled enough to be worse than anger. His gaze went first to the ruined drum, then to the knife in Ivy's hand, finally to Ivy. Do you know what you just destroyed? Her heart hammered in her throat. Yes. A murmur moved through the soldiers. Garrick's eyes narrowed. That drum carries the authority of the crown to every watchtower in this kingdom. I know. You stopped a military signal in front of my entire army. I stopped the wrong signal. The courtyard went still again. His face did not change. What did you say? Ivy forced herself not to look away. That cadence was wrong. The royal signal master approved it. Then he approved a lie. The guards moved before Garrick even spoke, closing around her from both sides. He looked at Ivy for a long moment. Chain her. Irons snapped around her wrists. A guard took her knife. Another pulled her away from the platform. Whispers spread through the ranks. Omega. Sabotaged. Mercer. She heard her father's name moving through the courtyard like smoke. Garrick turned toward the drum. Secure the signal house. No one enters or leaves. Find out who approved that sequence. A gray-black shape moved through the soldiers. Flint, the Alpha King's war wolf, crossed the courtyard without command. Ivy had seen him respond to battle drums before. Every trained war-wolf in Thornhold knew the same directional cues. Flint stopped beside the ruined platform, his ears lifted. Then, instead of turning north with the formation signal, he wheeled toward the eastern wall. His body went rigid. A low growl rolled from his chest. Garrick noticed. So did Captain Jonah Reed. "Flint," Garrick said. The wolf did not look at him. He stared at East Gate. Ivy's pulse changed. Not north, east. Before she could speak, the outer gate burst open. A horse stumbled into the courtyard, foam white along its neck. The rider nearly fell from the saddle. Blood streaked one side of his face. "Your Majesty." Garrick crossed the courtyard in 3 strides. The messenger looked at the ruined drum, then at Ivy in chains. Fear entered his face. The North Watch answered the signal. Garrick went completely still. "What signal?" The messenger swallowed. "The one she just stopped." The messenger's words seemed to hang in the courtyard, long after he stopped speaking. Garrick looked past him toward the northern wall, as though distance alone might explain what had happened. The North Watch answered what? The rider pulled a folded strip of signal paper from inside his coat. His hands were shaking from cold, exhaustion, or fear. Ivy could not tell which. "A partial redeployment command, Your Majesty." North Watch received it 23 minutes ago. They relayed it to Stone Ridge and Black Fen before the tower captain realized the sequence had no matching order in the morning dispatch. Captain Jonah Reed stepped forward. 23 minutes? "Yes, sir." Jonah looked toward the ruined drum. The final cadence had not been struck 23 minutes ago. It had not been struck at all. A different kind of silence settled over the courtyard. Garrick turned. "Seal every signal tower from here to the northern border. No relay leaves without direct confirmation from the capital." Jonah nodded once and began issuing orders. Only then did Garrick look at Ivy. The chains around her wrists suddenly felt heavier. "You knew the cadence." "Yes." "You stopped it before it was completed." "Yes." "And yet someone transmitted part of the same command before the ceremony began." Ivy held his gaze. "Which means I wasn't the source. It means there is another source. Not innocence. Not yet." She respected him, unwillingly, for the distinction. The royal signal master, an older beta named Corwin Hale, was brought forward within minutes. His face had gone pale. "I approved the ceremonial pattern from the master sheet," he said. "The same sheet we have used for 3 years." "Who prepared it?" Garrick asked. "My office copied it from the sealed archive last week." "Who had access?" Corwin hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Garrick's voice hardened. "Names." 3 senior clerks, Lord Vane's War Office, myself, and... His eyes shifted toward Ivy. She already knew. "And Mercer," he finished. The whispers returned. Ivy closed her eyes for half a second. Of course, her archive privileges were limited, supervised, and mostly useless, but she had entered the restricted signal stacks more than once during the past month, because that was where the records about her father were kept. Garrick saw the reaction. "You accessed the sealed archive?" "Yes." "When?" 3 nights ago." Jonah stopped mid-order and looked back. Garrick did not raise his voice. "Why?" "Because I was looking for an old code." "The one you recognized today?" "Yes." The answer cost her the last visible trace of sympathy in several nearby faces. Garrick stepped closer. "Search her quarters." Ivy's jaw tightened. "You won't find anything that explains this. That is not your decision to make." 2 guards led her toward the signal house, while the courtyard fractured into motion behind them. Officers shouted. Runners sprinted toward the towers. Stable hands dragged fresh horses from the lower yard. The ceremony was over. The war had begun without anyone knowing who had sounded the first command. Ivy was taken to a narrow stone room beside the archive and fastened by one wrist to an iron ring in the wall. It was not the dungeon, but the difference felt technical. She could hear boots moving through the corridor outside, then silence, then more boots. Less than half an hour later, Garrick entered carrying a small leather folder. Jonah came with him. Neither man sat. Garrick placed the folder on the table and opened it. Inside lay 3 pages covered in old signal notation. Ivy recognized them immediately. Her stomach sank. "The forbidden northern cadence," Garrick said. "May copy. So you admit it. I copied those pages from the archive. Without authorization." "Yes." Jonah exhaled through his nose. Garrick's expression remained unreadable. "You recognized the code because you had studied it." "Yes." "And you hid a copy in your quarters." "Yes." "You're making this remarkably easy." Ivy looked at the pages, then back at him. "Because the truth doesn't become safer when I decorate it." Something shifted in Jonah's face. Garrick gave nothing away. "Why were you studying a prohibited military sequence?" Ivy hesitated for the first time, not because she lacked an answer, because speaking it aloud meant dragging her father's name back into a room full of men trained to associate it with betrayal. "My father died because of this code." Garrick's eyes narrowed. "Your father died for changing a field signal without authorization. That is what the record says." "You think the record is wrong?" "I think the code in that record did not belong to the system used in that campaign." Jonah frowned. "That was 8 years ago." "I know. How long have you been looking into it?" 8 years. The answer seemed to irritate Garrick more than denial would have. "You spent 8 years investigating a military conviction on your own?" "I spent 8 years trying to understand why my father died, insisting he had never sent the signal they executed him for." Before Garrick could respond, rapid footsteps struck the corridor. A young officer appeared at the door, breathing hard. "Your Majesty." "East Patrol has returned." Garrick turned. "Report." They made contact with enemy scouts beyond the Alder Ridge. Jonah's face changed. Alder Ridge was east, not north. The officer continued. "Not a large force." Ivy felt the room sharpen around her. Garrick looked slowly back at her. Outside, somewhere deep in the castle, an alarm horn sounded once. "East." The officer swallowed. "There's more, Your Majesty." Garrick's voice was quiet. "Say it." "The northern garrison has already begun moving." By midday, Ivy Mercer had acquired the most dangerous thing a prisoner could have inside a royal fortress, a case against her that made sense. Captain Jonah Reed returned first with the search inventory from her quarters. Garrick had moved the interrogation from the signal house to a narrow council chamber beneath the eastern tower, close enough to the military archive that messengers could come and go without crossing the public halls. Ivy sat at one end of a long oak table, with one wrist still chained to an iron bracket fixed beneath it. Garrick stood near the window. Jonah remained by the door, a folded report in his hand. "We've found the forbidden code sheets," Jonah said. "I already admitted those were mine. We also found 3 archive access slips in your desk. I signed them myself. 2 were issued after curfew. I work late." Jonah's expression did not change. "Without permission." Ivy leaned back as far as the chain allowed. "If you intend to hang me for bad filing habits, Captain, I hope you at least choose a cleaner courtyard than the last one." Garrick looked at her, not angry, assessing. "Keep going," he told Jonah. Jonah unfolded the report. Her utility knife was tested against the resin used to seal the sacred drum's inner frame. Same compound. Ivy frowned. "That means nothing. It means the substance was on your blade. It is used in the signal house every week, not in the servants' corridor. I sharpen equipment for the drumkeepers." Jonah continued before she could say more. "A junior clerk named Elias Marr says he saw you near the sacred drum after midnight 2 nights ago." Ivy went still. "That part is true." Garrick turned fully toward her. "You were near the drum?" "Yes." "And you neglected to mention that. You did not ask." The temperature of the room seemed to drop. Jonah looked almost offended on the king's behalf. Garrick walked to the table. Then I am asking now. Why were you there? Ivy considered lying for exactly half a second. It would have been useless. I heard a rehearsal cadence from the lower courtyard. When? Just after midnight. Who was playing? I don't know. You entered the signal yard alone. Yes. And approached the sacred drum. Yes. Did you touch it? No. Garrick's eyes stayed on hers. How convenient. It is also true. He placed both hands on the table. Do you understand how this looks? Yes. Do you understand that your father was convicted of manipulating a military signal? The words landed harder than she expected. Ivy's jaw tightened. That has nothing to do with what happened this morning. It has everything to do with why I need to know what you are hiding. I am not hiding sabotage. That was not my question. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Garrick asked the question she had spent half her life avoiding. Was your father innocent? Ivy looked down at the grain of the table. 8 years of certainty would have been easier. 8 years of anger would have been easier. The truth was worse. I don't know. Jonah's brow furrowed. Garrick straightened. Ivy forced herself to continue. I know the official report says he altered a withdrawal cadence during the Red Hollow campaign. I know that signal sent 3 companies into an exposed valley. I know men died. I know my father swore until the morning they executed him that he never changed the order. Her throat tightened, but she did not stop. And I know the code listed in the final report was not added to the standard manual until 11 months after his death. Silence. Jonah looked at Garrick. Garrick's expression changed only slightly. Can you prove that? I can prove the dates. That is not the same thing. I know. The answer seemed to matter. Before Garrick could speak again, the door opened. A kennel master entered with Flint at his side. The royal wolf moved into the room with the quiet confidence of an animal that had never needed permission to belong anywhere. Jonah looked surprised. Why is he here? Garrick's gaze shifted to the wolf. Because he did something in the courtyard I want explained. They returned to the signal yard under heavy guard. Ivy's chain had been removed from the table, but remained around her wrists. Soldiers watched her, as if she might destroy another piece of royal property simply by standing near it. The sacred war drum remained split open on the platform. Corwin Hale, the royal signal master, had placed a smaller training drum beside it. Garrick stood in front of the gathered officers. Play the current Northern Defense cadence. Corwin nodded to the drummer. 3 beats sounded. Slow, fast, fast. Flint immediately turned north. The kennel master gave no command. The wolf had simply responded to training. Garrick looked at Ivy. Again, the drummer repeated it. Flint turned north again. Ivy's pulse quickened. She already understood what Garrick was testing. Corwin changed the sheet. This is the cadence copied from the notation found inside the sacred drum frame. He looked uneasy. The drummer began. 2 slow beats, a shortened pause, then the first 2 rapid strikes. Flint's head snapped east, not north. East. The wolf took 2 steps toward East Gate and growled. A murmur passed through the offices. Jonah stared at the notation. That code says Northern redeployment. No, Ivy said. Everyone looked at her. She stepped closer, despite the guard beside her tightening his grip. That paper says Northern redeployment. She nodded toward Flint. But the trained field response says East. Corwin's face drained of color. Garrick took the notation from him. You're saying the written command and the operational cadence no longer match. I'm saying someone changed one of them. Which? Ivy looked at the torn sacred drum, then at the old notation in Garrick's hand. I don't know yet. That answer frustrated him. She could see it, but he did not turn away. Instead, Garrick looked toward Jonah. Remove the dungeon order. Jonah hesitated. My lord? She remains under guard. No cell. Several officers exchanged glances. It was not freedom. It was not trust. But it was the first decision Garrick had made since the courtyard that moved even slightly in her direction. Then Corwin spoke. "Your Majesty." His voice had gone thin. Everyone turned. The old signal master was staring into the exposed wooden frame of the ruined drum. "There's something here." He reached inside and pulled free a narrow strip of parchment. Old, folded, hidden beneath the resin lining. Ivy knew the handwriting before Corwin opened it. Her breath stopped. Garrick noticed. "What is it?" Ivy looked at the page, then at the king. "That," she said quietly, "is my father's signal mark." For the first time since the courtyard, no one looked at Ivy like a prisoner. They looked at her like a door that had just opened onto something worse. Garrick took the strip of parchment from Corwin and held it by the edges. The mark was small, no more than 3 dark strokes pressed beneath a faded signal notation, but Ivy knew it better than she knew her own handwriting. Her father had used that mark on every training sheet he reviewed. A narrow slash, a hooked line beneath it, then one short stroke to the right. It meant verified, not approved by the Crown, not transmitted, simply checked by Signal Master Thomas Mercer. Jonah moved closer. "You're certain?" "Yes." Ivy's answer came too quickly for doubt. Garrick studied her face. "Could someone copy it?" "Anyone can copy 3 lines." "That is not what I asked." Ivy looked again at the hidden parchment. "The shape, yes. The pressure pattern would be harder." Corwin frowned. "Pressure pattern? My father damaged 2 fingers on his right hand when I was 12. After that, his downward strokes dragged slightly left." She pointed without touching. "That one does." No one spoke. Garrick folded the parchment carefully. "Signal archive." Now, the room beneath the eastern tower had no windows and smelled of dust, leather, wax, and old smoke. Shelves climbed from floor to ceiling, packed with field manuals, relay ledgers, tower reports, and sealed campaign records. Ivy had spent years finding excuses to work near those shelves. This was the first time she had entered with an Alpha King beside her and 2 armed guards at her back. Garrick placed the hidden parchment on the central table. "Show me how someone could corrupt the network." Ivy looked at him. "You believe it's corrupted?" "I believe a signal appeared at North Watch before my drum completed it. My wolf responded in the opposite direction from the written order, and your dead father's mark was hidden inside the drum." He pulled out a chair. "That is enough to investigate. Not enough to trust anyone." "Fair. Evisat." Corwin brought 3 current signal manuals and the tower relay book. Jonah laid a map of the kingdom across the table. Ivy began with the simplest layer. "The army does not hear the king directly." Garrick's eyes narrowed slightly. She pointed to the courtyard on the map. "The capital sends a source cadence. The nearest towers translate it into horn or flag, depending on distance and weather. Field commanders respond to the translated order." Jonah nodded. "We know the relay system, but you treat it as one system." She moved her finger from Thornhold to Northwatch, then to Stone Ridge, then to Black Fen. "It is 3 systems stacked on top of each other. Source code, relay interpretation, field response." Garrick leaned over the map. "So where would you change it?" "That depends on what you want. To move troops without changing my visible order." Ivy looked up. That was the right question. "You wouldn't alter the final field command. Too many officers would notice. You alter the translation between source and relay." Corwin's expression tightened, meaning the king could strike one pattern and the towers could be trained to hear another. Jonas swore under his breath. Ivy continued. "To do that consistently, you would need access to old cadence tables, current deployment codes, and the relay revisions distributed after the spring campaign." Garrick straightened. "How many people have all 3? Corwin did not answer immediately. "Not many. Names. The Royal Signal Master, 2 senior clerks. Captain Reed's operations office has deployment codes. Lord Vane's War Office receives all relay revisions. At the mention of Alaric Vane, no one reacted dramatically. That made Ivy more uneasy, not less. Powerful men were rarely dangerous, because everyone suspected them. They were dangerous because no one did. Garrick tapped the map. What about you? Ivy met his gaze. I had access to old cadence tables. Current deployment? No. Relay revisions? Only archived versions after implementation. He nodded once. Again. Not trust. Measurement. A runner arrived before noon. Captain Reed. East Patrol survivors at the lower gate. Jonah was moving before the sentence ended. They found 6 riders in the stable yard. 3 were wounded. 1 horse returned without a rider. The patrol commander, Lieutenant Marcus Vale, had blood dried from his temple and one sleeve tied tight above the elbow. Garrick crossed directly to him. Report. Vale saluted despite the injury. Enemy scouts at Alder Ridge. Were not scouts, Your Majesty. Advance markers. How many? We found signs for at least 2 companies behind the ridge, possibly more farther east. Jonah's jaw tightened. That close? They're measuring approach roads. Garrick glanced toward the eastern wall. Ivy understood the significance immediately. An army that intended to attack from the north did not spend men measuring distances to East Gate. Vale continued. We captured 1 rider. Alive? For a while. His expression hardened. He died before we reached the outer road. But he was carrying this. Vale removed a narrow strip of treated cloth from inside his coat. Signal cloth. Enemy field communication. Jonah took it and unfolded it. There were direction marks, timing intervals, and a handwritten correction near the bottom. He stared at it, then looked at Ivy. Garrick noticed. What? Jonah handed him the strip. Ivy felt the room change before anyone spoke. Garrick stepped toward her and held out the cloth. Read it. She did. The notation described a staggered probe against the eastern defenses, but that was not what made her blood run cold. The correction in the margin was written in a narrow, compact hand. Herhen. Not similar. Not close. Hers. Jonah's voice was quiet. We pulled that from an enemy officer less than 2 hours ago. Ivy stared at the letters. The final stroke on the word hold curled downward, exactly the way hers did when she wrote too quickly. Someone had studied her, not just her access, her writing. Garrick watched her carefully. You still believe someone inside the signal network is manipulating this? Yes. Even with your handwriting on an enemy order? Especially with my handwriting on an enemy order. Jonah gave a humorless laugh. That is convenient. Ivy turned to him. No, Captain. Convenient would be forging a dead man's mark. She pointed toward the castle. This is different. Garrick's gaze sharpened. How? Because my father cannot defend himself. She looked at the enemy strip again. I can. A horn sounded from the eastern wall. Once. Then twice. Jonah looked toward the gate. A tower guard shouted from above. Movement on Alder Ridge. Every soldier in the yard turned east. Ivy did not. She looked at Garrick. For the first time, she saw something in his expression that had not been there in the courtyard. Not belief, but doubt. Not doubt about her, doubt about himself. By evening, the enemy's signal strip had been examined by 4 different hands, and every one of them reached the same conclusion. The writing belonged to Ivy Mercer, not merely in shape, in a bit. The same narrow spacing, the same downward hook on certain letters, the same impatient shortening of repeated words. Even Corwin, who had spent years reading reports from the signal staff, finally stepped back from the table and said nothing. That silence was worse than accusation. Ivy stood on the opposite side of Garrick's private war table, while rain struck the tall windows behind him. Her guards had been reduced from 4 to 2, but the chains had returned. This time, only at the wrists. Garrick had ordered the room cleared except for Jonah. He placed the enemy strip between them. Tell me it is forged. Ivy looked at the writing again. It is. How? I don't know yet. Garrick's jaw tightened. Jonah folded his arms. You expect us to believe someone copied your hand closely enough to fool people who work beside you every day? No. Jonah frowned. Ivy looked at Garrick. I expect you to decide whether the evidence makes sense. It makes a great deal of sense. No, it looks convincing. That is not the same thing. Garrick's expression hardened. Explain the difference. Ivy leaned forward as far as the chains allowed. If I were working with the enemy, why would I warn you about the Eastern attack? To establish credibility. Then why destroy the drum in front of 500 witnesses? To stop a signal that might expose you. Except that signal had already been transmitted from somewhere else. Garrick said nothing. Ivy continued. And if I had access to the enemy courier who carried that strip, why would I write the correction in my own hand? Jonah answered this time. People make mistakes. Then your traitor is either clever enough to compromise an entire military relay system, or foolish enough to sign enemy instructions like a shopkeeper marking a receipt. That silenced him. For a moment, Garrick picked up the strip. You said someone studied you? Yes. How long would that take? To copy my letters? Not long. To copy your habits? Ivy thought about it. Longer. How much longer? Weeks. Maybe months. A different thought entered the room. Garrick saw it too. This did not begin with the ceremony. No, it began before you destroyed the drum. Long before. His eyes shifted toward the hidden parchment, recovered from the drum frame. Her father's mark. 8 years old. Or made to look 8 years old. Garrick moved away from the table. Tell me about Red Hollow. Jonah glanced at him. My lord, leave us. Jonah hesitated, then bowed and walked out with the guards. The door closed. For the first time since Ivy had crossed the courtyard with a knife in her hand, she and Garrick were alone. He did not remove the chains. She noticed that. So did he. Your father's execution, Garrick said. Start there. Ivy stared at the rain moving down the windows. There is not much to tell. I doubt that. She almost laughed. There was no humor in it. Thomas Mercer was signal master to your father's army. During the Red Hollow campaign, 3 companies were ordered to withdraw east after a false northern engagement. They marched into an exposed valley. Enemy archers were waiting. How many died? 187. Garrick knew the number. Of course he did. Your father was accused of altering the signal. Yes. And the evidence? A written correction in his hand. His verification mark. 2 witnesses who said he handled the final relay sheet. Almost the same pattern. Garrick heard it. Ivy watched the realization settle over him. He denied it until the end. What did he claim? That the sequence on the sheet was not the sequence he transmitted. Garrick turned toward her. Exactly what you are claiming now. Yes. Rain hit the glass harder. Ivy lowered her voice. I believed him because I was 16, and he was my father. That was not evidence. Garrick said nothing. So I looked for evidence. For 8 years. Yes. What did you find? Ivy hesitated, then decided there was no reason left to protect what she had learned. The final inquiry report listed the disputed cadence as North 2-7. Garrick nodded. I know the code. You know it now. He went still. Ivy continued. It did not exist during Red Hollow. What? The signal manual used that year ends at North 2-4. 2-7 first appears 11 months after my father was executed. Garrick stared at her. I checked 3 archived copies. You are certain? Yes. Then why was that never raised at trial? Because the trial record was rewritten after the campaign. The words landed heavily. Garrick looked toward the locked cabinet containing old military reports. If that is true, someone altered a royal inquiry. Yes, and the same kind of alteration may be happening now. Yes. He was silent for a long time. Then came the question Ivy had been waiting for. Who had the authority to revise those manuals? I don't know. That is not good enough. I know. A knock sounded. Jonah entered without waiting for permission. War Council has assembled. Garrick's face closed again. The private uncertainty disappeared beneath the Alpha King. He looked at Ivy's chains, then at the guards behind Jonah. Bring her. The War Council chamber was already crowded when they arrived. Commanders lined both sides of the long table. Corwin stood near the signal maps. Lord Alaric Vane occupied his usual position at Garrick's right hand. Ivy had seen him many times. Silver beginning at his temples, dark formal armor, calm eyes, a man who never seemed surprised. Alaric looked at Ivy's chains, then at Garrick. My king, I must object to her presence. Garrick took his seat. Object. A few commanders shifted uncomfortably. Alaric remained composed. She is implicated in compromised military orders. Her handwriting is on enemy material. She is also the reason we know the Eastern defense is being tested. One useful warning does not erase evidence. No. Garrick's answer was immediate. But evidence does not become truth because it is inconvenient to question. Ivy looked at him. That was new. Alaric noticed too, only for a fraction of a second. Then he nodded. As you wish. The council began. Reports came rapidly. Enemy movement remained scattered in the east. North Watch had seen fires beyond the ridge, but no confirmed army. 3 supply columns were delayed. 2 northern villages had begun evacuating after false signal reports. Confusion was spreading faster than soldiers. Alaric moved pieces across the map. They are testing us. Jonah nodded. East Gate? Possibly. Alaric shifted another marker north. Or they want us focused east, while the true force crosses Black Fen. Ivy studied the map. Something bothered her. Not the pieces. The timing. How long between the first northern signal and the enemy movement at Alder Ridge? Several commanders looked at her. Corwin checked his notes. 38 minutes. And the North Watch fires? An hour after that. Ivy looked at Garrick. They are not coordinating attacks. Alaric's attention settled on her. What are they coordinating? Our response. The room quieted. Ivy pointed at the map. Every time we receive a signal, our forces move. Then the enemy appears where the movement creates uncertainty. Jonah leaned closer. A reaction test. Yes, Alaric considered it. Then we stop reacting. Not entirely, Ivy said. His eyes hardened slightly. We verify before we react. One of the older commanders scoffed. In battle, verification costs time. Garrick spoke before Ivy could. Sometimes, his gazemeters. Sometimes moving faster costs more. Ivy was not sure whether he meant the map or the courtyard. The council ended without a final decision on her guilt. That was both better and worse. As guards led her back toward the eastern rooms, Ivy heard footsteps behind them. Garrick. He dismissed the guards with a gesture. You think I should release you? I think, if you believed I was the traitor, I would already be in the dungeon. That is not an answer. No. She turned to face him. You believe me enough to use what I know. Garrick's expression tightened. Careful, but not enough to stand beside me when it costs you. The corridor went very still. Ivy could hear rain ticking against the narrow windows. Garrick lowered his voice. You think this costs me nothing? I think authority is easier to protect than a person everyone already expects to be guilty. The words struck. She saw it. He did not defend himself. That almost made it worse. Before either of them could speak again, Lord Alaric appeared at the far end of the corridor. My king. Garrick turned. Alaric approached carrying a sealed dispatch. North Watch has confirmed 3 separate fire lines beyond Black Fen. Jonah followed behind him. We may be looking at a full northern feint. Maybe? Garrick asked. We cannot confirm troop numbers. Alaric placed the dispatch in Garrick's hand. Then we cannot afford to wait. Ivy's attention shifted to the signal notation written beneath the seal. Herr Pulstopt, Alaric continued. We should issue the emergency recall before midnight. Pull the Eastern Reserve companies inward and reinforce the northern road until we know where the real strike is coming. Garrick studied the order. Ivy took one step closer. No. Everyone looked at her. Garrick's eyes narrowed. What? She pointed to the sequence. Do not send that. Alaric's expression finally changed. Only slightly. Garrick looked from the dispatch to Ivy. Why? Her mouth had gone dry. Because she knew the cadence. Not from the current manual. From the pages her father had died, trying to explain. Ivy looked directly at the Alpha King. Because that is the signal they need you to send. For 3 seconds, no one in the corridor moved. Garrick looked at Ivy as if the rest of the fortress had fallen away. You know that sequence? Yes. From where? My father's records. Lord Alaric Vane's voice remained calm. Your Majesty, we do not have time to build strategy around the memory of a convicted traitor. Ivy turned toward him. No. You have time to verify a signal before you move 2 reserve companies out of position. Alaric's expression barely changed. And if Black Fen burns while we verify? That is the question they want you asking. Then give me 2 hours, Ivy said. Garrick looked at her. For what? To compare the recall cadence against the archived relay tables. If the sequence was altered the same way as the sacred drum, I can prove it. 2 hours while northern villages evacuate in panic. 30 minutes, Garrick said. Ivy stared at him. That is not enough. It is what you have. Then you are not asking me to verify it. You are asking me to fail quickly enough that you can say you tried. Garrick's face hardened. Do not mistake restraint for weakness, Mercer. And do not mistake speed for certainty. Garrick held her gaze. Then he handed the dispatch to Jonah. 30 minutes. Ivy was taken back to the archive under guard. Corwin brought every emergency recall table used over the past 12 years. Pages spread across the floor, the central desk, 2 stools, and half a storage chest. Ivy stopped seeing paper. She saw intervals. She checked the current notation against the field manual. Correct. She checked it against the spring revision. Correct. She checked tower translation sheets. Still correct. At 26 minutes, Ivy found a discrepancy. Not in the cadence. In the response rule. She pulled a northern relay ledger close. Corwin, the old signal master, hurried over. What? Read the reserve instruction attached to emergency recall. He bent over the page. Eastern Reserve companies move to interior northern staging points, pending direct royal confirmation. Now read last winter's edition. He found the older volume. His face changed. Eastern Reserve companies hold gate position until direct confirmation. Ivy looked at him. Someone reversed the default. She grabbed both ledgers. Time. I found it. You can tell the king. I need the distribution date. Mercer? She shoved the ledger into Corwin's hands. Find out when this revision went to the field commanders. Then she ran. The guards caught up halfway to the war chamber. Garrick was already standing over the map when Ivy entered. Alaric had placed black markers beyond Black Fen. Jonah was arguing for another patrol. Ivy dropped the ledgers onto the table. The cadence is clean. Alaric's mouth tightened with satisfaction. Ivy continued. The response rule is not. Garrick looked down. Explain. Last winter, emergency recall required Eastern Reserves to hold position until direct confirmation. The current edition orders them to move immediately, then wait for confirmation inland. Jonas Woche. How many commanders have the revised edition? I don't know yet. Alaric leaned over the page. This revision passed War Office review. That does not make it safe. It makes it lawful. Ivy looked at Garrick. There is a difference. A horn sounded outside. Then, another. A runner burst into the chamber. Black Fen reports fires on 3 ridgelines. Northwatch requests immediate reinforcement. Alaric pointed at the map. If those fires mark a main force, every minute we delay leaves the north exposed. Ivy shook her head. They are making you choose before you can verify. Garrick's jaw tightened. He looked at the northern markers, then east. Then back to Ivy. How certain are you? She hated the answer. Certain enough to stop the recall. That is not what I asked. No one can be certain yet. Another runner arrived. Your Majesty, Thorne Vale has begun evacuation. They report movement in the tree line. Alaric's voice dropped. My king. Garrick closed his eyes for one brief second. Ivy understood before he spoke. This was the man who had built his rule on deciding before fear spread through the ranks. The man who believed hesitation killed. And someone had built the trap around that belief. Send the emergency recall, Garrick said. Ivy felt something inside her go cold. Jonah did not move. My lord, send it. Ivy stepped forward. If you issue that order, Eastgate loses both reserve companies. If I do not, the Northern Road may collapse. That is what they want you to choose between. Garrick's eyes met hers. I will not gamble northern villages on a theory. No, her voice was quiet now. You are gambling Eastgate on one. The command went out. First the Capitol drum, then the horn tower. Then, one after another beyond the walls, distant signals answered through the dark. The final eastern horn sounded. 2 reserve companies began moving. At 32 minutes, North Watch sent the message Ivy had been afraid of. No army, no Siegerline, no massed infantry, only abandoned fire pits, rider tracks, and cut branches dragged through snow to imitate troop movement. A decoy. Jonas stared at the map. Alaric said nothing. Then the eastern alarm bells began. Not one. All of them. The sound ripped through Thornhold. A guard threw open the chamber doors. Beyond the windows, orange points of light were appearing along Alder Ridge. A runner collided with the doorframe, blood on his collar. Your Majesty, enemy companies are moving on East Gate. Our reserves are already 3 miles inland. Garrick did not move. Ivy watched the truth reach him. Not merely that she had been right, that he had completed the enemy's plan himself. How long? She asked. How long until East Gate is exposed? Jonah answered. Less than an hour. Ivy turned to Corwin. There is one countersignal. What countersignal? Garrick demanded. Corwin swallowed. Old Field Suspension Code. It orders commanders to hold their current position until direct visual confirmation. Then send it. We cannot. Ivy looked toward the eastern hills. The Capitol transmission was removed from active use years ago. Only the original hill tower still has the full cadence plate. The tower outside the inner wall, Jonah said. Yes, the enemy will reach that road first. Probably. Garrick crossed the room. The guards beside Ivy reached for her chains. Take them off. Garrick's voice sharpened. Now. Iron opened around Ivy's wrists. For the first time since the Sacred War drum split beneath her knife, her hands were free. Garrick looked at her. Can you send the counter-signal? Yes. Can you guarantee it will stop the reserves? No. His jaw tightened. Ivy held his gaze. But it is the only chance you have left. For once, he did not ask for certainty. He reached for his sword. Then I'm going with you. The eastern rain had turned the road below Thornhold into black mud by the time Garrick and Ivy reached the outer yard. Jonah was already there with 8 Wolfguard riders, weapons secured, cloaks fastened tight against the wind. Flint stood beside Garrick's horse, soaked through and restless, his gray-black fur flattened against his body. No one wasted time asking whether Ivy should be armed. Jonah handed her a short knife. She looked at him. For the tower mechanism, he said. Of course. His expression told her he knew perfectly well she might need it for something else. Garrick mounted. Ivy was given a smaller dark mare beside him. The east gate opened. Rain drove into them immediately. They rode hard. The hill tower stood less than 4 miles beyond Thornhold's inner wall, but the road twisted through pine-covered slopes and narrow stone cuts that turned 4 miles into something much longer when an enemy was advancing from the same direction. Behind them, The fortress bells continued sounding. Ahead, firelight flickered occasionally through the trees. Ivy kept hearing the recall cadence in her head. Not the notes. The consequence. Every strike Garrick had authorized had moved soldiers away from where they were needed. She could feel him riding beside her, without looking. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing useful to say yet. After a mile, Jonah raised one hand. The column stopped. Movement. Ahead. 4 riders stood across the road beneath a narrow stone arch. Royal uniforms. Thornhold colors. One of them lifted a lantern. King Garrick. Garrick moved forward. Identify yourself. Lieutenant Caro, East Road Security. Jonah leaned slightly toward Garrick. I did not post Caro here. The lieutenant pulled a sealed document from inside his coat. Emergency order from the War Office, Your Majesty. Garrick did not move. Read it. Caro hesitated, then broke the outer fold. By authority of the Crown, Ivy Mercer is to be detained immediately and returned to Thornhold. His Majesty is to be escorted to the inner keep for his own protection until the eastern incursion is contained. For one heartbeat, even the rain seemed quieter. Ivy looked at Garrick. His face became completely still. I gave no such order. Caro paled. My king, it carries your seal. He extended the paper. Jonah took it first, checked the wax, then handed it to Garrick. Ivy leaned closer. The royal crest was unmistakable. Not a rough imitation. Not copied badly. A genuine impression. Garrick turned the document toward Jonah. Who has access to the secondary seal? Jonah answered immediately. You? Obviously. Chancellor Morin. Poser. And Lord Vine. No one said Alaric's name after that. They did not need to. Ivy looked at the wax again. The seal is real. Garrick nodded. So someone expected the men carrying this order to obey without question. The irony hit both of them at once. Ivy said nothing. Garrick's jaw tightened. Lieutenant Caro lowered his weapon. Your Majesty, I did not know. I know. That surprised Ivy. Garrick looked at the soldiers behind him. You followed a lawful-looking command. That is not treason. Then his voice changed. But from this moment forward, no order bearing my seal is enough. You confirm my voice, or Captain Reed's authority directly. Caro bowed. Yes, my king. A distant explosion rolled across the eastern hills. Jonah looked toward the Tower Road. We move. The rain worsened as they climbed. By the time the signal tower appeared through the trees, the enemy had reached it first. 2 bodies lay outside the lower door. Thornhold Sinelmen. Jonah dismounted before his horse. Fully stopped. Position. The wolf guard spread immediately. An arrow struck the stone beside Garrick's head. Flint lunged toward the trees. 3 enemy soldiers broke from cover. Steel flashed. Ivy ran for the tower. The door had been forced inward. Inside, the lower mechanism room was dark, except for one overturned lantern. She could smell oil and burned rope. Her stomach dropped. No, the vertical relay line had been cut. The main striker rope hung uselessly from the ceiling. Garrick entered behind her, sword wet with rain and blood. Can it be repaired? Not before East Gate falls. What can you use? Ivy looked upward. The hill tower had been built before mechanical relay systems became standard, before rope triggers, before coded striker plates, before everything became efficient enough that one altered sheet could compromise half a kingdom. At the top of the tower was the original drum platform. Manual. She grabbed the knife Jonah had given her. The old drum. Another crash sounded below. Jonah shouted from the doorway, more coming. Garrick turned. How long? Ivy was already climbing. If the drumhead survived. 5 minutes. You have 3. She looked back. That seems to be your favorite number. Something almost like a smile crossed his face. Then an enemy soldier burst through the lower doorway. Garrick met him with the sword. Ivy climbed. The stairs shook beneath boots in combat. At the top, wind ripped through the open stone arches. The old field drum stood beneath a rotting wooden shelter. Its hide was cracked, but intact. Beside it, mounted to the stone wall, were metal cadence plates blackened with age. Ivy searched. Hold. Advance. Retreat. Northern rally. Eastern alarm. Then, field suspension. Her hands trembled. She ran her fingers across the old plate. 4 measured strikes. Pause. 2 short. Pause. 1 long. Simple. Deliberately simple. Because the code had been created during a century when battlefield commanders were expected to distrust confusing orders. Ivy almost laughed at the thought. Below, metal struck stone. Garrick shouted something she could not hear through the storm. She lifted the mallet. The first strike rolled out across the valley. Boom. The second. Boom. The third. Boom. The fourth. Boom. Pause. 2 short strikes. Boom, boom. Pause. Then the final long note. Boom. The sound carried into the rain. Nothing answered. Ivy stood completely still. Come on. The wind moved through the tower. Below, someone screamed. Then, far to the southeast, a horn answered. 1 long note. Ivy shut her eyes. Another tower answered farther away. Then another. The signal moved across the valley. Hold position. Await confirmation. Hold position. Await confirmation. The Eastern reserves would stop. Not return yet, but stop. It was enough. For now. Footsteps came up the stairs. Ivy turned with the mallet raised like a weapon. Jonah appeared first. Blood ran from a cut above his eyebrow. Please don't hit me. She lowered it. Did they answer? He grinned despite himself. Every tower we can hear. Garrick followed. His coat was torn at one shoulder. Flint came behind him, growling low. Jonah dragged someone into the upper room. An enemy officer. Alive. Barely. Garrick crouched in front of him. Who paid you? The man spat blood onto the stone. No answer. Jonah searched his coat. He found coins. A small map. Then a folded contract, protected inside oiled leather. Jonah opened it. His expression changed. He handed it to Garrick. At the bottom was a stamped crest, a black hawk, above 3 iron bars. House Vane. Ivy stared at it. Physical proof, not rumor, not handwriting, not suspicion. Garrick read the document twice. Mercenary transport authorization. Jonah nodded. Signed through a Vane trade company. Could have been stolen, Garrick said. Ivy looked at him. He looked back. For the first time, she understood that he was no longer defending Alaric. He was refusing to make the same mistake twice. One piece of evidence was not enough. Good. Ivy turned toward the old wall cabinet beside the cadence plates. The lock had been broken years ago. Inside were damp tower ledgers, rolled maps, and records nobody had bothered transferring to the central archive. She pulled out the oldest volume. Red Hollow Year. Her hands stopped. Garrick. It was the first time she had used his name without title. He heard it. Crossed the room. Ivy opened the ledger. There. A revision entry dated 6 days before the Red Hollow disaster. Old North 27 sequence, authorized for experimental relay testing. That should have been impossible. Officially, the code had not existed. Beneath the entry was Thomas Mercer's name. Not his signature, a note beside it. Signal Master objected. Requested removal, and below that, authorization to retain sequence. Signed, Alaric Vane, Deputy War Secretary. Ivy stared at the ink until the letters blurred. 8 years. Her father had not created the signal. He had objected to it. Garrick read the entry beside her. The storm moved through the open tower. Finally, he said, "He didn't just frame you." Ivy looked down at her father's name. "No." Her voice was almost lost beneath the rain. "He framed my father first." By the time Garrick returned to Thornhold, the eastern bells had stopped. the reserves had held. Eastgate still stood, and Lord Alaric Vane was waiting in the great hall as though nothing had changed. The court had gathered around him, commanders, signal officers, nobles, guards. Alaric stood beside the war table, with 3 sealed reports arranged before him, when Garrick entered with Ivy, Jonah, and Flint at his side. Every voice died. Alaric's eyes went first to Ivy, then to the old ledger in Garrick's hand. For the first time, Ivy saw fear. "My king," Alaric began, "we were told you had been taken beyond the walls against—" "Enough." Garrick's voice was quiet. That made the room listen harder. He placed the forged arrest order on the war table, my secondary seal. Then, the mercenary contract, House Vane transport authorization, then the tower ledger, and this. Alaric looked at the page. His face changed. Garrick turned to the court. 8 years ago, Signal Master Thomas Mercer was convicted of altering a field command at Red Hollow. The record stated that he created the sequence that sent 187 soldiers into an ambush. Ivy could hear her own heartbeat. Garrick opened the ledger. He did not create it. He looked at Alaric. He objected to it. A murmur spread through the hall. Alaric straightened. "An old tower ledger is not proof of treason." "No," Garrick said. "One piece of evidence is not enough." Ivy looked at him. He had learned. Garrick pointed to the forged order. "But this bears a royal seal available to only 3 officers." Then, the contract. This paid enemy riders through a company controlled by House Vane. Jonah stepped forward, and the eastern assault began exactly after the emergency recall moved our reserves inland. Alaric's composure cracked. "You sent that recall," he said to Garrick. The room went still. "Yes." Garrick did not flinch. "I did." Alaric seized the opening. "Then if Eastgate nearly fell, the fault is yours." Ivy expected anger. Instead, Garrick nodded. "Yes." That single word struck harder than any denial. "I was warned. I chose speed over verification because I believe hesitation was the greater danger." His eyes moved across the commanders who had watched him order Ivy chained that morning. "I was wrong." No one breathed. Alaric's face hardened. "She made you weak?" Garrick looked at him. "No. She made me question an order before more men died carrying it out. I was arrogant enough to call that weakness." He turned to the guards. "Arrest Lord Vane." Alaric reached for his sword. Flint moved first. A low growl filled the hall. "Alaric froze." The guards took him. Garrick then lifted the old ledger again. "By authority of the crown, the conviction of Thomas Mercer is vacated. His rank and honor will be restored to the military record." Ivy closed her eyes. 8 years of anger did not disappear, but something inside it finally loosened. Later, after the hall emptied, she found Garrick in the signal courtyard beside the ruined sacred war drum. The chains that had held her that morning rested on the stone between them. "I punished you for refusing to obey me," he said. "You did. I used what you knew, while refusing to give you my full trust. You did that too. I cannot undo either." "No." He accepted the answer. "That mattered. If you stay," Garrick said, "I will never again ask silence from you because the truth is inconvenient to me." Ivy studied him. "That isn't enough." "I know. No Omega servant is barred from the Signal Archive because of rank." "Done. No battle order moves without 2 independent confirmations." "Done." She glanced at the torn drum. "Then ask me again someday." His brow lifted. "Ask you what?" Ivy smiled faintly. "Whether I'm staying for the kingdom." Months later, the sacred war drum sounded again. Ivy stood beside the royal signal master, not behind the servants. Garrick waited before the final cadence. Ivy listened. Correct rhythm. She nodded. The drum thundered across Thornhold. Flint turned toward the proper gate. Garrick looked at her. "Good signal?" Ivy looked east, where the towers answered one by one. This time, the kingdom did not change in a day. That, Ivy discovered, was the difference between surviving a crisis and fixing the thing that had allowed it to happen. Alaric Vane's arrest did not erase the habits he had built into Thornhold's military system. Garrick could remove one traitor from the council, but he could not remove years of unquestioned obedience with a single command. So they began with the signals. Every military order now required 2 independent confirmations. Archive access was recorded instead of restricted by rank. Omega clerks, who had once been allowed only to clean tables and carry sealed messages, were trained to read basic signal notation. Some officers complained. Garrick let them. Then he made them follow the new rules anyway. Ivy remained in the signal house, not because anyone ordered her to, because she chose to. 3 months after the attack on East Gate, Garrick found her alone in the archive after sunset, surrounded by old campaign ledgers. He leaned against the doorway. You know, most people celebrate being cleared of treason by working less. Ivy did not look up. Most people do not discover 8 years of corrupted military records at the same time. That sounds suspiciously like an excuse. That sounds suspiciously like a king distracting someone from her work. He crossed the room. There was an ease between them now that had not existed before. Not comfort exactly. Something more deliberate. Trust that had been tested rather than assumed. Garrick placed a folded document beside her hand. Ivy looked at it. What is this? An appointment. Her expression immediately hardened. To what? Royal Signal Advisor. No. Garrick blinked. You have not opened it. I heard the word royal. That is usually considered an advantage. It usually comes with people deciding where I stand and what I am allowed to say. Garrick was silent for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair opposite her and sat, then changed the terms. Ivy looked at him. He meant it. She opened the document. The position gave her authority over relay verification, archive reform, and signal training throughout Thornhold. Near the bottom was an empty section marked Conditions. Ivy almost smiled. You left this blank. For you, that was either very wise or extremely dangerous. I have learned those are sometimes the same thing. She took up a quill. No restriction of archive access by secondary rank. Agreed. Signal officers answer to the evidence chain. Not noble title. Agreed. And if I tell you a command is wrong in front of your entire army? Garrick's mouth shifted. I listen before ordering chains. Ivy finally smiled. Improvement. Silence settled between them. Then Garrick said, There is another question. Ivy put down the quill. This one does not belong in the document. I assumed as much. He stood. There was no audience, no court, no sacred war drum, just 2 people in a room full of records that had once been used to bury the truth. When you told me to ask again someday, Garrick said, I remembered. I hoped you would. Are you staying for the kingdom? Ivy looked toward the shelves, toward her father's restored name in the official record, toward the future she had built without anyone offering it to her. Then she looked back at Garrick. Not only for the kingdom, he did not reach for her immediately. That mattered too. Ivy closed the distance herself. Outside, the eastern tower sounded the evening confirmation. One clean cadence. Then another tower answered. Verified. Certain? True. And for the first time in her life, Ivy Mercer understood the difference between being allowed to remain somewhere and choosing to belong there. By the following spring, no one in Thornhold called Ivy Mercer the Omega, who destroyed the sacred war drum. They called her the woman who saved East Gate. Ivy never liked the title. It made the story sound simpler than it had been. The truth was messier. She had been right. Garrick had been wrong. Men had nearly died because of it. And afterward, both of them had chosen to build something better, instead of pretending one victory had repaired everything. On the anniversary of the Eastgate attack, the signal courtyard filled again. Not for war, for the first graduation of Thornhold's new signal corps. Betas stood beside gammas. Gammas stood beside omegas. Rank. Determined responsibility now. Not worth. Garrick waited near the restored Sacred War drum, while Ivy inspected the final cadence sheet. Flint rested beside the platform, older only in the small silver beginning to show around his muzzle. Jonah stood with the officers. Corwin watched from the front row. Ivy ran one finger beneath the notation. Verified once. Then again. She handed the sheet to Garrick. Ready. He looked at her. A year earlier, he would have simply given the order. Now he asked, confirmed? Ivy nodded. Confirmed. Garrick raised his hand. The drummer struck. The sound rolled across Thornhold. One tower answered, then another, then another. No confusion. No hidden correction. No frightened soldiers moving because someone powerful had told them not to question. Just a signal understood the same way by everyone who heard it. When the ceremony ended, Garrick found Ivy standing beneath the eastern arch. You were right about something else, he said. That happens often. He smiled. You said I should ask again someday. Ivy turned toward him. And? Someday appears to have arrived. His voice softened. Are you staying? This time, there were no chains between them, no council, no kingdom waiting for the answer. Ivy took his hand. Yes. Garrick's fingers closed around hers. For the kingdom, she looked toward the eastern towers, as the final confirmation echoed across the valley, then back at the man who had finally learned that listening was not surrender. No, Ivy said. This time, I'm staying for us.